The grand hall of the Galactic Convergence was filled with beings of every imaginable shape and size. Towers of translucent crystal moved gracefully across the polished floor. Creatures with wings of shimmering light hovered above in intricate patterns, and serpentine bodies coiled elegantly around massive pillars that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. Every corner of the hall thrummed with a low hum of energy, the sound of countless species meeting in ritualized diplomacy. At the center, seated on a throne carved from the black stone of a long-dead world, was the alien queen. Her eyes, large and multifaceted, reflected the entire room as though she carried the universe in her gaze. She had ruled for centuries, her empire stretching across star systems and galaxies, her word unchallenged for millennia. The meeting began as it always did, with the reading of reports, the trading of data, and the subtle maneuvering of power. The Queen's voice, when she spoke, was like the echo of gravity itself, calm, precise, and unyielding. Delegates bowed, lowered their heads, or changed their posture as she passed her gaze over them, each responding to the silent weight of her attention. She had faced every conceivable threat: ambitious lords, rival species, even whispers of rebellion that could unsettle entire systems. Yet today, something in the room felt different. A small figure, almost inconspicuous among the grandeur, moved forward. The delegate was from a minor system in the Outer Rim, a place so quiet and unremarkable that most of the hall had forgotten it existed. He carried a message, a report from one of the exploration fleets, and spoke without the usual trembling deference expected of his kind. His words were carefully chosen, factual and polite, a stark contrast to the usual flattery or veiled threats common in the Convergence. Then, almost in passing, he mentioned it, a single name. It was a human name. The room went silent as if the air itself had paused. A ripple ran through the delegates. Many of them had never encountered a human. Fewer still had ever known one to venture into the domain of the alien queen, yet here was a name that seemed to carry a weight far beyond its origin. The queen's multifaceted eyes focused sharply on the small delegate, and for the first time in centuries, her lips parted not to speak but to pause. She did not blink. She did not move. Even the low hum of the room seemed to fade as the name hung in the air. Whispers spread quickly. Delegates leaned toward each other, voices hushed but urgent. "Do you know him?" one asked. "I thought humans were simple, fragile creatures," another murmured. "Why does the queen look as if she has seen a shadow of herself?" The air was thick with curiosity and unease. Humans were young, in cosmic terms. They had no fleets comparable to the queen's, no armies capable of toppling empires, and yet somehow this name had the power to stop the ruler of an entire galaxy in her tracks. The queen's advisors moved, carefully, as if approaching a sleeping predator. They brought forward data tablets, holograms of star maps, and historical records, trying to trace the human's activities. Yet nothing seemed sufficient to explain why one small, unarmed human could hold such power over her attention. The delegate, unaware of the effect his words had caused, continued with his report, listing fleets, supplies, and exploration schedules. The name lingered in the queen's mind, unrelenting, refusing to be dismissed. She waved her hand once, a subtle motion, and the chamber's attention returned fully to her. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade of sound. "All records concerning this human are to be retrieved immediately," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Every report, every observation, every note, find him." The words were precise, final, and left the delegates scrambling to obey. Some glanced at each other with fear, others with awe. No one had ever seen her issue an order so personal, so focused on a single being. In the farthest corners of the hall, the minor delegate froze as he realized the weight of the name he had spoken. He had heard stories about humans, strange, resilient creatures who had survived challenges no other species could endure. They were few in number, fragile in comparison, yet stories told of their cleverness, their determination, and an unshakable will that allowed them to thrive against impossible odds. No one had ever thought a single human could ever appear on the Queen's radar, let alone pause her centuries of unchallenged rule. Meanwhile, the Queen's memory drifted back to a time long ago, before she had fully claimed her throne. She remembered the first human she had encountered. It had been during a small skirmish on the edge of her empire, a human delegation sent as explorers rather than conquerors. They had no fleets, no weapons of mass destruction, nothing but simple ships and simple tools. Yet they had achieved what armies could not. They had forced the Queen to see the fragility in her perfection. They had asked questions she had never considered, seen truths she had overlooked, and challenged assumptions she had held for centuries. That human had not fought or demanded, yet the impact had rippled through her consciousness in a way that no threat could. The name brought all of that back. It was the name of the human who had changed her mind, quietly, subtly, without force. For a moment she considered letting it pass, as she often did with minor disturbances. Yet this was different. Time had passed, but the effect had not faded. Somehow, humans had continued to learn, to grow, to adapt in ways that were both invisible and unstoppable. Her advisors did not know this, and the room did not understand it, but she did. She rose from her throne, the motion slow and deliberate. The floor of the hall, usually resonating with the hum of her presence, now echoed with a strange weight. Delegates moved instinctively out of her way, leaving a path that seemed larger than the hall itself. She approached the central observation deck, where she could access every record in her empire. Her eyes scanned the data streaming before her, searching for any sign of the human, any trace of movement, any indication that he had crossed her territories again. The human, wherever he was, had done nothing remarkable in conventional terms. He had no fleets, no armies, no title of nobility or power. Yet the very mention of his name caused unease among the most ancient beings in the galaxy. That was the power humans held, the ability to inspire change, to disrupt expectations, to force consideration where no one thought change possible. The Queen understood, with a clarity that was both thrilling and terrifying, that she had underestimated humans. Delegates whispered among themselves, sharing fragments of stories about humans. Some said they were stubborn beyond reason. Others said they were endlessly curious, always learning, always asking questions that seemed simple but held profound consequences. One story told of a human who had negotiated peace between two warring planets without raising a weapon, simply by observing and asking the right questions. Another described a human who had solved a complex system of energy distribution, saving billions of lives, with nothing more than a notebook and determination. The room was full of beings who relied on power, technology, and tradition, and yet a single human had caused the Queen to act with urgency no one had ever seen before. The Queen summoned her most trusted counsel. "Prepare a search," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "I want him found, and I want him understood. This is not a threat, but a necessity. He represents a variable I cannot ignore." Her words, though calm, carried weight that made even the oldest and wisest delegates shiver. The council moved with precision, activating observation grids, scanning border systems, and sending out messages across the galaxy. All eyes were now on a human who had done nothing remarkable in the way most species understood it. For the human, life continued as it always had. He was unaware of the stir his name had caused. In a quiet corner of a distant star system, he was studying maps, making observations, asking questions about alien ecosystems and star phenomena. He had no desire for glory, no wish to lead or conquer. All he wanted was knowledge, understanding, and the chance to learn from the universe itself. And yet, unknown to him, his name had become a signal, a point of fascination and fear across countless civilizations. As the grand hall of the Convergence emptied for the day, the alien queen remained in her observation chamber, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. The name repeated itself in her mind, over and over, each syllable carrying the memory of a moment that had changed everything. She realized that her centuries of rule, her vast empire, and her unmatched authority could not prepare her for what humans represented. They were unpredictable, adaptable, and quietly unstoppable. The whispers of the council continued, growing into a soft murmur across the galaxy. "Find the human," they repeated. "Understand him. Learn what he has learned." And so, an empire that had never paused, that had never faltered, that had never been questioned in its authority, began a quiet search. Not to conquer, not to punish, but to comprehend. Because a single name had done what no fleet, no army, and no weapon ever could, it had made the alien queen stop, think, and wonder. The stars outside shimmered with light that had traveled for millennia, touching countless worlds along the way. And somewhere among them, a human continued his quiet work, unaware of the power his curiosity wielded. In that moment, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would come next. And the alien queen, who had ruled for longer than most stars had existed, felt the stirrings of a realization that would change the galaxy forever. The human moved through the quiet streets of the colony world, his eyes scanning the horizon of twin suns. The air was warm and filled with the scent of alien flora, plants that glowed faintly under the pale light, their tendrils moving slowly like underwater creatures. He carried a small data pad full of observations, measurements, and sketches he had made over the past several days. His curiosity never rested. Every rock, every plant, every breeze seemed to hold a secret waiting to be discovered. He had been told stories of the galactic convergence, of the alien queen, and of civilizations older than stars themselves. As a child, he had imagined towering ships, armies of unimaginable strength, and beings of impossible intellect. But he had always believed that knowledge, understanding, and patience mattered more than strength. And now, though he was unaware, that belief had made him a subject of fascination for the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. Back in the Grand Hall, the alien queen's attention remained fixed on the records her council had gathered. Every observation, every report, and every trace of the humans' movements had been compiled. Yet the deeper she delved, the more she realized that traditional metrics, fleets, power, influence, meant nothing in this case. This human wielded no weapons. He commanded no armies. He was not a diplomat nor an explorer seeking conquest. And yet the stories of his actions traveled faster and farther than any fleet the Queen had ever commanded. Her council struggled to understand. "Your Majesty," one advisor said, "he has no formal power. He does not lead. He does not rule. Why is he so important?" The human's power, they realized, was not something that could be measured or contained. He was a variable unlike any the galaxy had faced before, and the Queen felt the weight of that realization deep in her consciousness. Meanwhile, the human walked along a narrow ridge overlooking a valley of crystal formations. The formations reflected the twin suns in a kaleidoscope of color, and he paused to sketch them, noting how light interacted with structure in ways that defied simple explanation. He thought about the creatures that might live among the formations, how they might perceive the world differently, how every species shaped its environment in unique ways. In his mind, the universe was a puzzle, and every observation was a piece of the solution. Unbeknownst to him, small observation drones from distant systems had begun to follow his movements. They were tiny, almost invisible to the naked eye, and they recorded everything he did. But no action he took seemed threatening or aggressive. He simply studied, asked questions, and moved with a quiet intelligence that unsettled observers more than any weapon could. The drones relayed information to the Queen's council. "He does nothing remarkable in conventional terms," one reported. "Yet every interaction he has appears to shift local systems subtly. Trade routes adjust, alliances strengthen, conflicts resolve, all without direct intervention." He visited small colonies, spoke to scientists, engineers, and elders, asking questions, listening more than speaking, observing rather than directing. Everywhere he went, he left an impression, though often so subtle that those affected did not realize the change until much later. A settlement adopted a new way of harvesting energy after he suggested a simple observation. A trading post shifted its routes slightly, avoiding potential conflicts, because he had asked about their difficulties and listened carefully. He was never in a hurry, never seeking recognition. At night, under the glow of twin moons, he sat in a small clearing and recorded his thoughts. He wrote about patterns in alien life, about the flow of energy through ecosystems, about how civilizations adapted to challenges over centuries. He thought about the way knowledge could spread quietly, influencing outcomes without ever needing a threat or a fleet. For him, this was the way to understand the universe, through patience, observation, and the gentle power of ideas. Back in the Queen's chamber, the council was growing restless. "Your Majesty, we have tracked his path. We know where he is, what he observes, and what he asks. But we cannot quantify his impact. It defies calculation. He does not fear consequences, and that is why his name echoes across systems. Ingenuity outweighs size. Adaptation outweighs aggression. This human has survived, thrived, and influenced far more than any fleet could achieve. That is why I am compelled to find him. That is why I cannot ignore him." The human's power was subtle, almost invisible, but it was undeniable. Every system, every civilization he touched, shifted imperceptibly yet permanently. He was like a stone thrown into a vast lake. The ripples traveled farther than anyone could have imagined. Meanwhile, the human reached a small settlement on a distant moon. The inhabitants were shy, cautious, but curious. They had heard stories of humans, of course, but few had ever met one. They welcomed him politely, offering food and shelter, though they expected nothing of him. He asked questions about their water systems, their farming techniques, and their teaching methods. He listened to their answers, nodded thoughtfully, and sometimes offered a suggestion, always gentle and always optional. By the time he left, the settlement had begun to consider new ways of organizing resources and teaching children. They had not been commanded, threatened, or forced, only inspired, and that, as far as he knew, was enough. High above, unseen, sensors recorded everything. The data was sent back to the Queen, compiled and analyzed. "He changes the universe not by taking, but by giving knowledge," one advisor said. "He does not rule, yet civilizations shift because of him. How can we compete with that? And perhaps, if necessary, we follow." It was an influence that could not be measured in traditional ways, but the results were clear. Systems became more resilient, civilizations more thoughtful, and disputes resolved through understanding rather than force. Back in the Queen's hall, the realization deepened. She understood why she had paused when she first heard his name. Not because he threatened her empire, not because he could overthrow her, but because he represented something entirely different: the quiet, unstoppable power of intelligence, curiosity, and human perseverance. He embodied a truth no weapon, no fleet, no empire could ignore. Understanding could be stronger than domination, insight more powerful than fear. The council finally began to see the truth. "We have seen wars, revolutions, uprisings," one elder said. "We have seen fleets crush planets and civilizations rise and fall, but never have I witnessed a being who can shift the galaxy without striking a blow. Because if we do not, the galaxy itself will change in ways we cannot predict." Every observation, every report, every calculation reinforced what the Queen already knew. He was unlike any other being, and the impact of his quiet intelligence would resonate across civilizations for generations to come. As the twin moons rose over the quiet valleys and glowing forests of distant worlds, the human paused in thought, gazing at the stars. He wondered at their distances, at the time it took light to travel, and at the civilizations he might one day encounter. He did not know that his very name had caused the greatest ruler in the galaxy to pause, to reconsider, to act with a focus rarely directed at a single individual. The universe, it seemed, was beginning to notice him. And that, in its own quiet way, was exactly what humans did best: make their presence felt without demanding it, change the world without coercion, and move forward simply by learning, observing, and persevering. The alien Queen, seated again in her throne room, studied the stars. Her mind was alive with questions, possibilities, and admiration. She understood that humans were unpredictable, adaptive, and quietly unstoppable. And though she did not yet know what this meant for her empire, she knew that she could not ignore the human whose name had fallen into her awareness. Somewhere among distant worlds, the human continued his quiet work, unaware of the weight his curiosity carried. And in that silence, the galaxy held its breath, watching, waiting, and learning alongside him. The human had been traveling for weeks through a sector of the galaxy so remote that even the oldest star charts barely mentioned it. Nebulae of violet and gold stretched across the void, and comets left long, glowing trails behind them as if painting the dark canvas of space. He moved slowly from planet to planet, careful to observe without disturbing, and yet every stop he made left an invisible imprint on the local civilizations. Systems adjusted, not by force, but by example, by the quiet questions he asked, by the curiosity he inspired. On a small, forested world, he had arrived at a settlement nestled in the roots of enormous trees. The inhabitants were cautious at first, creatures with delicate limbs and soft, luminescent skin who had rarely seen visitors from other stars. Yet the human approached gently, showing patience and respect. He asked about their food sources, how they communicated over distance, how they solved problems when resources were scarce. He listened carefully, nodded, and sometimes wrote notes on his data pad. He did not command or judge, he simply sought to understand. By the time he left, the settlement had begun to reimagine their trade routes and resource allocation. A system that had struggled quietly for decades began to thrive in subtle ways, guided not by instruction, but by observation and example. Somewhere far away, the Queen's sensors recorded these shifts. Each one, while small, formed a pattern that was growing stronger, spreading outward like ripples from a stone tossed into water. Back in the Grand Hall, the alien Queen paced slowly before her observation platform. The data her council brought her now filled entire holographic displays, showing networks of influence, alliances forming, and conflicts resolving, not through fleets or armies, but through careful thought and subtle intervention. She had seen many beings rise to power through strength, intelligence, or cunning, but never through quiet curiosity alone. This human's methods were entirely alien to her understanding of influence. Her council debated quietly, trying to grasp the scale of what they were witnessing. "Majesty," one said, "he does not act with force. He does not negotiate for titles or resources. He asks questions, listens, and moves on. And yet, the systems he touches, they thrive." They had faced tyrants, conquerors, and even ancient entities capable of destroying entire star systems. And yet, a single human, unarmed and without armies, had caused the Queen herself to act in ways she had never acted before. Meanwhile, the human continued his journey. On a planet of floating islands, he spent days observing the movement of airborne creatures, how they traveled between islands, and how the inhabitants adapted to their unpredictable patterns. He suggested minor adjustments to their energy distribution systems, not as commands but as questions. "Have you tried this?" Or, "What happens if we observe this pattern over a longer period?" His approach was subtle but effective. By the time he departed, the settlements had shifted their infrastructure, improved their communication, and avoided potential conflicts that would have arisen otherwise. Each action, small as it seemed, rippled outward. Networks of colonies began to exchange knowledge more efficiently. Resource shortages were predicted and solved before they became crises. Disputes over territory faded as inhabitants learned from one another, inspired by the subtle guidance of the human who had touched their lives without ever raising his voice. High above the galaxy, the Queen studied these changes. She could see the invisible threads connecting settlements, colonies, and civilizations, and how the human's quiet influence strengthened those threads. Unlike other beings, he did not seek to replace the old order with his own. He strengthened what was already there, helped what was struggling, and inspired what was stagnant to grow. The galaxy had begun to change without a battle, without a single command from him. The Queen called her council together once more. "We have tracked him for months," she said. "We understand where he is, what he does, and the effects of his presence. Yet we cannot predict his next move, and that is the point. We must understand the principles he applies, even if he does not articulate them. Observe carefully, do not interfere, and prepare for the possibility that we may need to meet him personally." The inhabitants were skeptical at first, a mixture of scientists and explorers who were cautious of visitors from beyond their system. The human asked to observe their work, to record data, and to speak with them about their methods. He asked simple questions. How do you measure the stability of the storms? What happens if the gases shift in composition? Have you tried tracking the energy flows over a longer cycle? By the end of his visit, they had discovered new methods to stabilize energy grids, improve communication arrays, and anticipate environmental shifts. They had learned from the human without realizing it, guided by his quiet questions and patient attention. Back in the Queen's chamber, reports from her council confirmed the human's growing influence. "He touches life without touching it," one said. "He moves through the galaxy like a current of thought, and everything in his path adapts and improves. He acts because he is curious, and the universe responds. That is what makes him extraordinary. You are expected." Meanwhile, the Queen's attention sharpened. "He has received the message," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "He understands curiosity. He understands observation. Soon he will understand us." How can one human wield such influence? He wondered what awaited him, why his curiosity had drawn attention, and what he might learn from the civilizations gathered there. He did not feel fear, only a deep sense of responsibility to observe, to understand, and to continue learning. As he approached the vast expanse of the convergence, he saw the grand hall in the distance, towering above everything else in the system. The architecture was both alien and magnificent, a testament to centuries of civilization, order, and discipline. And at its center sat the alien queen, observing, waiting, and preparing for the moment when she would finally meet the human whose name had caused silence across her empire. The galaxy held its breath. Civilizations paused, systems adjusted, and even the stars seemed to shimmer with anticipation. The human, unaware of the full weight of his presence, approached calmly, ready to observe and understand what lay ahead. The Queen watched him from her throne, her mind alive with curiosity and respect. She understood now why she had paused when she first heard his name. Not because he threatened her empire, not because he commanded fleets or armies, but because he represented something entirely different: the quiet, unstoppable power of intelligence, observation, and humanity. And as the human crossed the threshold into the convergence, the chamber seemed to grow still, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the meeting of two extraordinary forces: one ancient, all-powerful, and wise; the other young, curious, and quietly unstoppable. In that moment, the queen understood something profound. She had ruled countless systems, faced unimaginable challenges, and seen civilizations rise and fall. Yet this human, who had never sought power, who had never fought, who had never demanded attention, was perhaps the most influential being she had ever encountered. And she knew that meeting him would change everything. The human stepped through the vast entryway of the grand hall, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of the galaxy around him. The chamber stretched impossibly high, filled with light that shimmered off alien surfaces and refracted into countless colors. The floor beneath him was polished and smooth, reflecting the grand shapes of beings from 100 civilizations, all pausing to look at him with awe, curiosity, or quiet fear. He was small compared to the scale of the hall, unarmed, and yet somehow entirely at ease. At the center, the alien queen waited. Her throne rose above the floor like a black monolith, carved from the stone of a world that had long since collapsed into starlight. Her eyes, large and multifaceted, followed him as he walked. She had never faced a being like this human before. All her experience with leaders, rulers, and conquerors had taught her to look for ambition, power, or cunning. But here, she saw none of those things. He walked with purpose, yet without ego. He observed the hall calmly, taking in the architecture, the delegates, the technology, the history written into every surface, and then his eyes met hers. For a moment, the chamber was silent. The delegates, sensing the weight of this encounter, stepped back. Conversations died mid-word. Even the soft hum of energy that filled the hall seemed to fade. The queen felt it as clearly as the human did, the pause of the galaxy itself. She had paused before when his name was first mentioned, but now she saw him. Now she understood that the influence he carried was not hypothetical or distant. It was real, immediate, and undeniable. The human approached slowly, bowing his head slightly in respect, though not as a gesture of fear. He had learned from every civilization he had visited that acknowledgement was different from submission. He understood the power in listening and observing, in speaking with clarity and humility rather than command. When he finally stopped before the queen, he raised his gaze, meeting her eyes with steady curiosity. The queen studied him for a long moment. "You have come," she said, her voice echoing like gravity in the chamber. It was calm, but carried the authority of countless systems under her rule. "Do you understand why I have summoned you?" "I wish to understand, not to impress or to challenge." "And what do you see?" "I do not wish to change things unless it helps someone understand something they did not know before. That is all." "You do not command, yet civilizations adjust their course because of your questions, your observations, your patience. That is a force I cannot ignore." She had ruled countless civilizations, faced threats that would have shattered lesser beings, and yet she felt something new in his presence. It was not fear, nor awe, nor anger. It was respect. Not the respect that comes from submission or conquest, but the respect that comes from recognizing brilliance, patience, and insight that could not be stopped. She spoke again, her voice lower, almost a whisper, though it carried to every corner of the hall. "I have ruled for centuries, seen civilizations rise and fall, commanded fleets and armies that could extinguish worlds. And yet I have never encountered one like you. I do not know if the galaxy has ever faced such influence without force before. Perhaps it is not the galaxy that is different, Your Majesty. Perhaps it is only perspective. I have learned that small actions, careful observation, and thoughtful questions can ripple outward farther than grand gestures. And when those ripples meet prepared minds, the results are stronger than I could predict. You move the galaxy not through fear, but through understanding. That is unprecedented. But I do not seek influence for myself. To see how the galaxy reacts to someone who acts not from ego, not from desire, but from curiosity and understanding. I think of it as interaction. Even the oldest and wisest beings in the chamber felt the subtle shift in energy. The human was not loud, not commanding, yet his presence demanded attention, reflection, and consideration. "Your approach is remarkable," the queen continued. "You do not dictate, you do not manipulate, you do not coerce, and yet the galaxy responds. Your questions plant seeds that grow without force, and civilizations flourish. You embody a principle I have never witnessed before: intelligence and curiosity as a force greater than armies. And I have learned that the universe has answers for those willing to observe, even when others cannot see them. I have only acted as I understand. I do not seek praise or recognition. I wish only to see, to learn, and to understand. If others benefit, that is a fortunate consequence. But I do not seek to shape the universe by will alone. She had faced beings who sought to overthrow her, who wielded armies, fleets, and ancient technology. And yet she felt that this human who had never sought power or glory had achieved something far beyond all those efforts. The galaxy itself seemed to respond to him in ways she could not fully comprehend. Finally, she spoke again, her voice calm but carrying the weight of centuries. You do not act as others do. You are not motivated by dominance, ambition, or fear. You are human, and that, it seems, is a force no one can ignore. But I do not act with power in mind. And in that you are unstoppable. A galaxy that listens, learns, and adapts. A galaxy guided not by force, but by insight and understanding. It seems we have much to observe, Your Majesty. Delegates from countless civilizations whispered softly, unsure whether to speak, move, or even breathe. The meeting between the alien queen and the human had shifted the air in ways they could not describe. Some called it awe, others called it wonder, but all understood that what they had witnessed was extraordinary. The queen sat upon her throne, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the soft glow of the hall. She no longer saw the human as a curiosity, a variable to be tracked, or a minor observer. She saw him as a principle in motion. Everything he had done, every question he had asked, every subtle ripple he had created across the galaxy had been deliberate only in the sense that curiosity and understanding were deliberate. And that, she realized, was stronger than power, stronger than strategy, stronger than fleets of starships or armies of millions. The human stood before her, calm and unassuming. He had explored, observed, and asked questions for decades, though not in search of recognition or power. He had never intended to impress anyone, and yet he had impressed the most powerful ruler in the galaxy simply by being himself, curious, patient, thoughtful, and relentless in his desire to learn. You understand now why I paused when your name first reached me, the queen said softly, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. It was not fear, nor anger, nor doubt. It was recognition. Recognition of something I had not understood before. Recognition that a being could influence the galaxy in ways no weapon, no army, and no law could enforce. I did not seek recognition, Your Majesty. I did not seek influence. I wished only to observe, to understand, to learn. That others have benefited from my observations is fortunate, but it was never my goal. Because you see patterns others ignore and systems adapt naturally in your presence. You have done what no empire could accomplish through force. You have inspired change. It is their choice to act. Many had witnessed rulers, generals, and conquerors rise and fall, all driven by ambition or fear. And yet here was a human who had done more to shape the galaxy than armies or treaties ever could, without a single act of coercion. The idea was so new, so unlike any history they knew, that it left them silent. The human stepped forward slightly. Then perhaps what matters is not the method, nor the position, nor even the species. Perhaps what matters is willingness to observe, to learn, and to help when possible. The universe responds to those who seek understanding, not those who seek control. That is why your name will not fade from the memory of this galaxy, even if you never seek fame or glory. You have shown that influence can come from insight, not force, that change can be guided by observation, not command. Majesty, does this mean we will allow humans to participate in our governance, our science, our exploration? Will we grant them knowledge, privileges, or positions? And in comprehension, civilizations flourish. She had faced beings who demanded control, who sought to dominate through fear, who wielded intelligence only as a weapon. And here was a human who had done more than all of them combined, simply by thinking, asking, and observing. She felt a strange mixture of awe and humility. You have changed my perspective, she said softly. I have ruled for centuries, yet you remind me that influence can be gentle, quiet, and profound. That it does not require fleets or weapons, but patience, curiosity, and understanding. You have done what few could ever achieve. You have led without commanding. If others walk that path more safely, more wisely, that is the natural result of attention and thought. I do not claim leadership. I only hope that learning benefits all. You embody a principle that all civilizations can aspire to, but few achieve. That true strength comes not from power, but from thought. That lasting change comes not from domination, but from understanding. You have shown the galaxy how to grow without conflict, to evolve without force, to progress without coercion. They had witnessed wars, revolutions, and treaties, yet none of those had shifted the galaxy in the way this human had done. And as they watched him stand before the Queen, it became clear that humanity's power lay not in size or weaponry or dominance, but in the simple, profound ability to observe, think, and inspire. The human turned his gaze to the stars visible through the vast ceiling of the hall. He thought about the countless civilizations he had visited, the questions he had asked, the patterns he had observed. Every small action, every tiny ripple had contributed to the wider network of understanding that now spanned star systems. He realized that the universe itself was a classroom, and he had only been one of its students. Yet, through careful attention, he had become a teacher, not by decree, not by ambition, but by example. The Queen watched him, understanding fully for the first time why she had paused when his name was first spoken. It was not because he had threatened her empire, nor because he was clever in conventional ways. It was because he represented a principle she had rarely seen in her long life: the unstoppable, gentle force of humanity, unarmed yet undeniably influential, small yet larger than any fleet or empire. She spoke again, softly as if to herself, yet with words that carried across the hall. The galaxy must learn from this human. We must observe, not dominate. We must understand, not command. His presence is a lesson older than fleets and empires, and yet it is entirely new. If they refuse to share knowledge, they limit their own growth. These are lessons that transcend species, systems, and worlds. They are the principles by which civilizations endure. They realized that the galaxy's history had just shifted. Not through conquest, not through diplomacy, not through armies or fleets, but through thought, observation, and subtle influence. And they understood that this human, who had never sought fame, power, or authority, had done more to change the course of civilizations than any emperor, any general, or any council in history. The human glanced around the hall, seeing countless eyes fixed on him, yet he remained calm, unassuming, and focused. He understood that influence was not about recognition, and he had never sought it. He simply moved, observed, and asked questions, and in doing so he had created ripples that the galaxy could not ignore. The Queen rose slowly, her motion deliberate. She approached the human, studying him with a mixture of respect and wonder. "You have taught me something I could not have imagined," she said softly. "You have shown me that the galaxy can change, not through domination, not through fear, but through understanding, patience, and thought. You have done what few could even conceive. And that is why your name will echo across systems, not as a threat, not as a ruler, but as a guide, a principle, and a reminder of what is possible. That is all I have ever sought." The delegates felt the shift, the subtle understanding that power need not come from violence, ambition, or fear. Influence could be quiet, persistent, and intelligent, and the human had embodied that truth completely. The human looked once more to the stars visible above the grand hall. He thought of the countless civilizations he had visited, the small ripples he had left in their lives, and the questions he had asked that had prompted subtle but lasting change. He understood that the galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and full of mysteries, and he was content to continue learning, observing, and asking questions, leaving change to follow naturally from understanding. The Queen returned to her throne, her mind alive with reflection. She had ruled for centuries, seen civilizations rise and fall, and faced challenges she thought could never be surpassed. And yet she had learned something new, something profound: that the smallest, quietest acts of curiosity and intelligence could shape the galaxy more powerfully than any fleet, any army, or any decree. And in that moment, the universe itself seemed to breathe in quiet acknowledgement, recognizing the extraordinary impact of a single human who had walked calmly into the heart of the convergence and taught the galaxy, without ever intending to teach, what it meant to be truly unstoppable. The stars above shimmered with subtle light, as though acknowledging the lesson. Civilizations far and near would remember this encounter, not as a conquest, not as a war, but as a revelation. And the human, unaware of the full measure of his influence, continued to move forward with quiet curiosity, leaving the galaxy wiser, stronger, and forever changed.